Dr. Lee Pierson and Dr. Robert Stubblefield. I'm Steve Richins, and on today's show, we have a special returning guest, Dr. Harry Binswanger. And the title, the clickbait title, is The Locus of Focus. And this title comes from a post on HBL a couple of years back, and it's become one of my favorites. So if you're interested, subscribe to hblletter.com. And so that's the clickbait title. The more technical title is what exactly is under our direct volitional control. And then a subtitle, a descriptive subtitle is an introspective examination of the act of free will. And I'll turn it over to Lee to give us more.
Okay, well, you actually said pretty much what I was going to say, because I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Binswanger, who we've had before as a guest, and he's always got great things to say. And let me just again mention that I don't want to go through his whole biography. I don't like to do that, but I do want to mention once again that he's the author of an excellent book, How We Know, modestly titled, I might say, How We Know, and that all of you should read that book. Anyway, let me turn over to Harry. He gets first crack at the issue of what exactly is under our direct volitional control, which I think is an important issue. And I myself think that it's been covered adequately before. So let's see, maybe we can do it today. Who knows? Dr. Binswanger. Harry, take it away.
Hi, thank you, Lee. I have covered this in what I think is large detail, full detail, amazing detail. I don't think you have large detail in various jumbo shrimp, various fora, which is a plural forms, and it never hurts going back into it again from a different angle, or even chewing the same angle, which I have some new thoughts. So let me first prepare the ground with some old thoughts. The first cut at the objectivist theory of free will that Ayn Rand gave was the choice to think or not to think. Then a few years later, when she wrote the Objectivist Ethics, she introduced to her audience the concept of mental focus. She said in the Objectivist Ethics, to think requires a state of full mental focus. Then that became a topic that was discussed in various lectures and so forth from people before my time or early in my time when I didn't contribute to it. And the point was made that, well, let me first describe phenomenologically mental focus. There's an introspectable coming into focus that you can experience after you've been out of focus. The contrast is from passivity, being a passenger in your own mind, to purposeful, what is it, kind of assignment to yourself, where you just kind of come to. You set yourself a goal of understanding something. Now, Lee is going to, based on past experience, make a point with which I fully agree. There's no such thing as focusing without coming into focus on something. There's no objectless focus. I only just focus my mind, but not on anything. However, you can focus your mind on a very, very general orienting question, like what's going on? Where am I? What day is it? What am I feeling now? What's doing? What's up? I just, something disturbed me. What is it? It doesn't have to be, what is the answer to this arithmetic problem? It doesn't have to have a narrow focus. but it has to be something. There's no such thing as a focus that isn't on something. Just as with the camera I'm now using, it has a focal length and it's focused at the distance I am from the camera. If I get back further or go up closer, well, this got pretty broad focal length. Yeah, see, my image is out of focus. So you're focused on something, and it's even more dramatic mentally. But deeper than the specific question that you give to yourself is getting into the driver's seat, assuming the managerial role. And focus in a deeper sense is driving your consciousness rather than being a passenger in it. It is taking control. It is observing what's going through your mind through the central and peripheral awareness and directing attention as is required. So, for instance, focus is not concentration. Focus most of the time involves concentration. Concentration is attention given to one topic to the exclusion of others. Focus normally, when you sit down to do some work, involves concentration. But even then, to be in focus, you can't just be concentrating. You have to go to the side. What was that? And go quickly back. So it involves directing your attention where you sense that it is needed to bring things into full, clear awareness that maybe are just inklings, as Lee likes to call them, from the outside, or alerts, cognitive alerts, emotional alerts. You get all kinds of signals. So you've got a managerial board there with lights that are coming on and a screen showing you what's going through the through foveal, and that foveal is in the word, a central clear focus. And you operate it. You're either the operator, the manager, the director, the initiator, and sustainer, and driver of your mental processes, or you're not. But you could be doing that while just walking down the street, looking at what's happening, making an occasional identification. You don't have to be highly abstract to be. You can be close to the perceptual level for a short period anyway. Pretty soon something is going to require your conceptual identification. So the best understanding that I had of what you can directly introspect about your volition until yesterday was you direct your attention, you take charge of the direction of your attention, and you turn it to the central task or the peripheral items that need attention as you sense it, as you get an awareness. Something's off, something's wrong, something's good. I have a sense of promise over here. Let me look over there. So it certainly does involve that. It involves sustaining attention when that's required, directing attention, and generally being in charge of the process of what you give attention to and what your mind is doing. So that's the most I had figured out until yesterday. And I was pursuing yesterday the question of why is it that a young child, say at 6 months of age, an infant, treats the objects of its perception differently, it appears, than, say, a 6-month-old dog or 2-month-old dog, or any dog. Yeah, I know you can argue about chimpanzees, but, we want a clear case of a lower species that's far enough away that this is a good contrast to make. So a dog or a cat, can look at something and can stare at it. But I get the sense that an infant even of 6 years, looks at something with a more inquisitive, what is it attitude. The animal is saying, is it going to do something? Can I eat it? But it's not interested in what the thing, I happen to have a harmonica in my hand, what the thing is. But a baby, you know, put it in its mouth and turn it over, it'll look at it. And so what is the difference? I don't have the full answer. And I can't even prove that there is a difference. Just looking at infants, it looks like that. And it occurred to me that one thing that a power that we have other than directing the beam of our consciousness from the central things to the peripheral things back, so forth, is the power of zooming in or narrowing down. We have a control of scope. And just like I can do that, boy, it's good that we have this video here, right? I can zoom in, I can pan back. So in your consciousness with the searchlight of your mind, it's not just on a swivel. There's a zoom lens on it, much more focal length change than on the camera I happen to be using. And I think a child looks at parts of things, looks at, to the extent it can on a perceptual level, aspects of things, but certainly he looks all around it, turns it over, and he's zoomed in a way that even a cat fixated on a little animal like a mouse that's in front of it and it's fixated on it, it's just waiting for it to jump. It's not saying, oh, look, it has a tail and those legs. But an infant learns very early to look at the part, to break things down, because he can then widen. He has control over the scope of his awareness. And part of being in focus is not just where you turn to, but do you zoom in to see a narrowed part of the thing, and then do you pan back to see it in relation to the whole? I think that's a basic volitional act that you have control of, and you learn very early in infancy that you can do that. And I think that hasn't been brought out enough in the discussion of focus, but it adds a lot of introspective clarity, in my view, to what we actually do when we manage our minds. So that's my opening salvo, Lee.
Okay, that's very interesting. See, I actually need time to think about it, but I don't have that time, so I'm just going to plow on ahead. But that's quite interesting. I'm going to comment on it shortly, because I'll let my brain rattle around a little bit with it for a while I'm talking about other things. So let me go back, and I wanted to start off by reading from Dr. Peikoff, from William James and Ayn Rand. I've read some of these things before on other programs, but they're worth rereading. And I'm going to start with Dr. Peikoff because I want to raise some questions about it. And I'm choosing OPAR's, the section from OPAR, not because OPAR, to ask questions about, not because OPAR is a bad book, but because OPAR is the best and most concise source of what's basically right about free will that you can find anywhere. How we know actually compares pretty well too on this subject. But anyway, I'm picking Peikoff because it concisely presents some things that I want to raise questions about. So this is from Objectivism, the Philosophy of Ayn Rand by Dr. Peikoff. I didn't write the page number down, but I'm just going to go ahead and read this briefly. Focus is not the same as thinking. It need not involve problem solving or the drawing of new conclusions. Focusedness is the readiness to think, and as such, the precondition of thinking. Again, a visual analogy, and I'll just say for a side, we've already, Harry has already mentioned the visual analogy, which goes back in the objectivist discussions a long ways back. I think it starts with Ayn Rand. A visual analogy may be helpful. Just as one must first focus his eyes, and then if he chooses, he can turn his gaze to a cognitive task, such as observing methodically the items on a table nearby, so he must first focus his mind. And then if he chooses, he can direct that focus to the performance of a conceptual level task. To change the analogy, the choice to focus, Miss Rand used to observe, is like the throwing of a switch. It may be compared to starting a car's motor by turning on the ignition. Parenthesis, whether and where one drives are later issues, close paren. This throwing of the switch consists of the exertion of one's mental capacity. Uh-oh, there's Shoshana.
I just brought you the book.
Okay, I'm just going to finish here. This exertion is work and is experienced as such. Not pain, but work, in the sense of basic mental effort. It is the effort required to reach and or maintain full awareness. Effort means the expenditure of energy to achieve a purpose. Okay, so here we have a brief description of focus that makes an analogy to vision. And the analogy to vision here is, there is an analogy to vision, but it's not quite, or I would raise the question, the obvious question about it. In visual perception, and Harry has already actually alluded to this, so I can be brief. You don't focus on focus your eyes and then look at something, because there is no such thing as generic focus. You cannot have the whole world in focus at once. That's not the way optics works. You have to focus, a lens has to be focused at a particular distance, and the convergence of the eyes has to be at a particular distance to see something. So there is no such thing as focusing your eyes in some general sense and then turning to an object and looking at that object that's in general focus. And I think the analogy does properly hold to the conceptual or cognitive, more conceptual level. There is no such thing as generic focus. I've never experienced it, where you just do something. And in Ayn Rand's metaphor here, throwing a switch, I don't believe I've ever experienced anything like throwing a switch that puts things into clarity. It just doesn't work that way. I've heard people say that they do, but I find it doubtful. You don't throw a switch and then the world suddenly becomes clear. So that's the main things I wanted to. One other thing I wanted to discuss was the issue of the precondition of thinking. That focuses the precondition. I haven't experienced myself this either. I just choose to think. And you could raise the question, well, don't you have to have, is it possible to just start thinking out of nowhere? And that question was raised in the Objectivist newsletter of, let me see here. Got the date, I think it's April 1964. I'm not going to read the whole answer, but in the Intellectual Ammunition Department, Daniel Brandon answers this question. He says, I'll just go to the key paragraph. The choice to focus or to think, and notice those are put together in the objectivist literature. They're in a positive, the choice to think, the choice to focus, as if they were referring to the same thing. And that's another question, I suppose. Does not consist of moving from a state of literal unconsciousness to a state of consciousness. This clearly would be impossible. When one is asleep, one cannot suddenly choose to start thinking. I've tried it during dreams, and it doesn't work very well, even in dreams for me. All right. To focus is to move from a lower level of consciousness to a higher level, to move from mental passivity to purposeful mental activity, to initiate a process of directed cognitive integration. Well, that's a description of focus. So I think that's the answer to the precondition issue. There is no, I don't believe there is a precondition of thinking, other than there is a state of awareness that you are in without choosing it. And there are things that come to mind quite automatically, and those things are not just nonsense. Those are often very useful things that enable you to decide, I need to direct my attention in a particular way. Okay, so that's those are some questions. Now I wanted to read quickly something from William James, and then something quickly from Ayn Rand about which I think gives considerable insight into what what free will, answering the original question, what is under our direct volitional control? And I'm going to argue it's not focus as such. It's mental effort. It's the mental effort of attention. And those are not equivalent ideas. Those are two different ideas. So let me go to James here. I'm going to try to cut this down as much as I can. Okay, it says, if you are asked, no, I better go back one line. Our moral effort, properly so called, terminates in our holding fast to the appropriate idea, holding on to some idea. If then you are asked, in what does a moral act consist when reduced to its simplest and most elementary form? You can make only one reply. You can say that it consists in the effort of attention by which we hold fast to an idea which, but for that effort of attention, would be driven out of the mind by the other psychological tendencies that are there. To think, in short, is the secret of will, just as it is the secret of memory. This comes out very clearly in the kind of excuse which we most frequently hear from persons who find themselves confronted by the sinfulness or harmfulness of some part of their behavior. I never thought, they say, I never thought how mean the action was. I never thought of these abominable consequences. And what do we retort when they say this? We say, why didn't you think? What were you there for but to think? And we read them a moral lecture on their irreflectiveness. James then goes on and describes a very interesting example. I think it's interesting with the drunk, and how the drunk can save himself by holding in mind the right word. It's very objectivist point, strangely enough, coming from a pragmatist, that getting the right word in your mind, the actual correct word, is really important in keeping your mind, on track to the truth. But I won't give you that example now. We'll just stop there for the moment in the interest of time. I'm going to go to Ayn Rand, and Ayn Rand writes very little about focus. It doesn't appear in Atlas Shrugged as the word focus appears, but in a different meaning. And it does appear, as Harry said, in the Objectivist Ethics. I think it actually showed up a little earlier in a lecture. But anyway, she writes
the Objectivist Ethics. That was the lecture, 1961.
That's the very first source? Okay. In any event, she has very little in print from her about focus, very little. There's another place where she, at a lecture, gave an answer concerning focus versus concentration, but stuff in print, it's just not to be found. However, in the book, The Journals of Ayn Rand, it's mentioned there that there were some notes, philosophic notes, clipped together with a paper clip. And one of these little notes, I'll read. I'm going to read most of it. Why not? Here's what she says. And I personally consider this is the most important thing I've ever seen that Ayn Rand wrote that she didn't publish herself. Now, there may be, who knows what else is out there, but this is, in my judgment anyway, it's really important. So she says, values set the psychoepistemological rhythm or tempo of cognition. They make one hold a given percept or concept in mind long enough to integrate. Notice that, long enough. Long enough to integrate. Integration is what makes a thing or issue real. Thus, non-attention or non-retention is a matter of lack of values, and values have to be connected to action. Here comes the really important part. And out of focus state may be a state of rushing past everything psychoepistemologically, while focus requires slowness. And then she puts a parenthesis with a question mark in the parenthesis. Personally, I would erase that question mark, but she put it there anyway. She says, think this over, it has many implications. So I really like this a lot. Focus requires slowness. And this integrates terrifically with the James passage, where James says, basically, the free will is holding something in mind, keeping it there longer than it would be. And what that does, as Ayn Rand says, is it makes more integration possible. It creates a greater amount of integration than you would already have. And then, I mean, we're talking here about actual slowness. And how is actual slowness achieved? Mental effort. The mental effort of attention is how you grab onto something. And by grabbing onto that something, either in the focus of your mind or it can be in the periphery brought in, it slows down the mental processes, or it keeps something under active processing that otherwise would not be under active processing. It keeps that going. And that can be very important because because of automatization and other factors, important stuff can easily slip by in your mind while you're thinking about many things at once. Some things will slip by too quickly before you have actually integrated them well enough with other material to satisfy your goals. So I think that these two things, the James and the Ayn Rand's statement here, integrate beautifully together. And I would say optimal slowness, which I would describe as that's the action of focus. Now, I use the word action of focus here because focus is often described in many places as a commitment. And you can talk about it that way, but you want to be very clear in distinguishing a commitment to doing something from the doing of the something. Those are not the same thing. So if you're committed to managing your mind or a corporation, whatever, you can be committed, and then there's the actual act of management, and those are not the same thing. I just want to make that point because it's easy to lose track of that. But anyway, optimal slowness, I believe, requires introspective awareness. Introspective awareness is intimately tied to the proper action of volition. Those things are very intimately put together because you need to know what's going on in your mind to identify those things that are slipping by too quickly and that should be focused on more. And so as Alan Blumenthal said in an article way back in the early days of Objectivism, the way he put it was monitoring, which is a form of introspection on thought process. Monitoring is the seat of volition, is the way he put it. And there's a certain truth to that. It's a little funny phrase, the seat of, but there's a certain truth. Introspective awareness is crucial to, in my opinion anyway, to actual focus. Now I'm going to say one other thing. Here's an extra conclusion I thought about, not exactly yesterday, but recently, about primary and secondary choices. That distinction in Objectivism. The primary choice is supposed to be the choice to focus. And then the secondary choices are the particular things, that you focus on or that you choose to do. And the secondary choices have causal antecedents. You're even something like your choice to have vanilla versus chocolate ice cream has antecedents in your genetics and in your learning history and other things, or all the specific choices have antecedents. But the one that doesn't is the choice to think. Well, the way I would describe this, I'm going to throw this out for discussion anyway, is that there are not primary and secondary choices in a sequential fashion. It's not that you make some primary choice, focus your mind, and then you think about something. It all occurs together. So these are aspects of one choice. The primary aspect is the choice to exert mental effort. That is a primary choice, first choice in consciousness, not caused by antecedent causes. Then there's what you choose to focus on. And these things happen simultaneously. You choose to focus and you choose to focus on something. The something, what that is a secondary choice in the sense that is subject to the operation of antecedent causes. That, when you choose to think, what you think about, what you actually choose to think about is partly a function of your values, partly a function of your knowledge, partly a function of how well things are automatized in your subconscious and what's present to you perceptually. All kinds of factors enter into that. But the actual choice to initiate mental effort, the exertion of mental effort, that's a primary choice. And let me do just one other quick thing, and I'll turn it over to Bob next, I guess. And that is, I want to distinguish focus from the choice to exert mental effort. You can choose to take the reins, as some people say, or to get behind the wheel of the car, as others say, or my favorite metaphor, and I think it's Harry's as well, is you choose to manage. When you choose to manage, get behind the manager's desk, the desk of the manager of the corporation. That's my favorite metaphor for what we do. All of those things can be done, however, well or poorly or even evilly. You can take the reins of the horse and ride the horse into the ditch. You can get into the car and crash the car into a telephone pole or even into another car. And you can manage the corporation. The first thing that came to my mind was Francisco, mismanaged Franconia Copper, but that's not really a good example because that's certainly not, he wasn't out of focus. That was not an active out. That was an in focus act, not an out of focus act. But normally that would be an out of focus thing, and it would be evasion, require evasion. So we have to take evasion into account. Evasion is volitional, and it is the exertion of mental effort. And for that reason, I don't think we can say that the basic, what's under our direct volitional control is equivalent to focus. Focus is a result if it's done well, if it's done optimally, if it's done under proper introspective control, you get focus. As an act, again, I have to distinguish, I'm talking about the act. The commitment, yeah, that's a choice. That's a choice. Now that, do we actually make that commitment all the time? I can't say I do. It's for me, it's kind of implicit that I have a commitment to, I really want to understand everything that's at all worth understanding. But it's not that I get up in the morning and say, I'm going to make sure that I understand everything today that's worth understanding. That will satisfy my values. I just don't do that. I get up in the morning and start doing my stuff. I'm going to stop there for the moment because I could go on for a long time. But let me turn it over to Bob, and then I'm sure Harry and Steve will jump in, and let's see what happens. Go ahead, Bob.
Okay. Let me take a different vision analogy before we get into what it's analogous to. Your eyes are closed, so you're not seeing anything. You open your eyes, you are seeing something. What are you seeing when you open your eyes? Well, it's whatever was drifting into or would have been in your awareness if your eyes had been open. You don't have control over it. That's something that's just there. So you open your eyes, that's the first act. And then you see that you're seeing something. It may be not what you want to see, so you direct your vision. That's your second thing. Okay, now let's apply that to mental focus. You're out of focus, you're drifting. You choose to focus. Now, Lee says you can't choose to focus without focusing on something. That's true. But what is it that you focus on if you choose to focus in the middle of drifting? It's whatever would have been in your center of awareness if you were not drifting. So in fact, you do focus on something. Your active focus is a separate choice, and you don't choose to focus on some particular thing. You happen to focus on what has been drifting by your center of awareness. So I very much object to Lee arguing with Leonard that there are not two separate choices. I've just given by analogy two separate choices. First, you choose to open your eyes. First, you choose to focus. Yes, it's absolutely true. You can't focus without focusing on something. But the something, I don't know why I'm getting an echo here.
Well, let me jump in to take advantage of your echo.
Yeah, go ahead.
Is that all right? I don't think that's introspectively quite right, Bob. I understand your hesitancy to go along with the way that Lee phrased it, even though I agree with Lee. I know what you're saying, but and I don't know if this will change anything, but introspectively, when I come into focus, what I'm focusing on is the state of my consciousness. And I think, whoa, I was out of focus, or what? I wasn't paying attention, if you're not an objectivist. What's up? It's not whatever would have been in my mind beforehand. It's something more involved with monitoring your state. You're getting an alert. That's what causes it. That may be what causes you to come into focus. When you're drifting, you have a discomforting feeling. You feel a little bit out of control or unsettled or something, and whoa, what's that? And you're answering the alarm. It's maybe not quite an alarm. And there's then a next question is, well, what should I be paying attention to?
Yeah, I'm with you.
Would you say you're
By the way,
with that?
I would add that usually it's not that it's most of the time I don't choose to open my eyes. That's pretty automatic. I mean, at some point I get up, and my eyes are open. Maybe it's possible for me to choose to open my eyes, but normally that's just an automatic process. And then what's my real first choice generally is to look at something and to direct attention to that something. That's where my real first choice is most times during the day and in the morning.
Yeah, let me add to that because I agree with Lee on this, and I don't think there's really any errors in what's the written thing is, but it's possible to understand in a more psychologically real way. In Opar, he talks about it's a readiness. And it is a readiness, but readiness has physical, maybe that's not the word, concrete substance to it. If you want to be ready, like let's say I'm going to be ready to jump. I'm at the mark of the run. I'm ready to race, right? Ready, set, go. Ready is the first word, right? What is it that you're doing? It's not some theoretical thing. You're tensing certain muscles. You're rehearsing certain starting strategies in your mind. You're doing stuff, and a readiness to focus involves scanning. It involves flickering your attention to, is there anything here? Do I need to think about this? What's going on here? It's an alertness. An alertness is not the dial is turned somewhere. Alertness is manifesting concrete reconnoiters or little forays into what, how about, what's it? Oh, okay, I don't need that. All right. And it doesn't have to be, compulsive. It doesn't have to be fretful or what's that? What's that? Oh. But it's a quality of sensitizing yourself to alarms and to things that you see, perception, as opposed to So I think I would go state what Lee said in a stronger way. Focus is not an act. It's an abstract description of other acts.
Right.
So in other words, it's like driving. What are you doing? I'm driving. No, you're not. You're not just driving. You're driving from here to there in this car at that. Yeah, okay, but that's what driving means. Do you have a choice to drive? Well, yeah, not as something separate from driving here to there, even if you just drive out of your home driveway to see the sights. It's always got to be from somewhere to somewhere. But when you say, I'm out for a drive, you're abstracting. And when you say, well, I'm in focus, I'm managing, that's an abstraction that integrates on some but any problem, on some but any purpose. So this is very important. Lee's point is very important to counter this kind of argument. Well, why couldn't natural selection have just wired us to be in focus all the time? It's because, as opposed to, say, beating our hearts, focus isn't some one concrete action.
Yes.
It's like saying, why couldn't nature have programmed us to eat healthily, or to exercise the proper amount, or to play the violin with virtuosity? It's rationality is not a switch in that sense, but I think there's validity to looking at it as a switch. It's absolute. It's absolute. Either you're being rational or you're making terms with the irrational. There's no middle ground. And in that sense, yeah, go ahead.
The commitment when people refer to focus as a commitment, looking at it from that perspective, then I think you can look at it as being like a switch or a single decision. You're either committed, or if you're not committed, you're not committed. It's if you're half committed, you're not really committed. So in that sense, looking at it that way. However, if you look at focus as an act, as an achievement, that is it requires taking specific actions that are appropriate at that moment. There's no switch you can flick. There's no hocus pocus that you can intone that will end up with you in the state of clarity, of achieving maximal clarity, of doing your best. You have to do specific things, and those things have to be directed by introspection, and that's my view anyway.
A couple of comments. One is, rather than going down the rat hole of arguing with Lee about what analogies are, we'll save that for the Clubhouse. Okay.
Oh boy.
The second is a thought that I had years ago when I attended one of Leonard's sessions. I guess it was pre-Confusion Papers. It was in, I think, Robert Patterson's apartment in New York City, and people would have assignments. And my assignment was on free will, and I wrote something up and submitted it, and then damned if I didn't have to go to Madrid on business. I did. So I never got to hear the feedback from my assignment. But one thought in that assignment that I found very useful since is that we speak of focus as requiring an effort, and we think of focus as sometimes throwing a switch. And I think of it as stepping on the dead man's throttle when you focus. That is, if you don't keep the effort going, then you're going to wind up drifting. So it's not a switch that you throw and then it continues to be thrown. It's a switch that you step on and you have to keep stepping on it.
That's true.
Yeah. Yeah.
Although I would, again, the one issue I'd raise with that, is that evasion requires it requires effort also.
Yes.
So
yeah, I know you keep making that point, and it's a true point, but I don't understand what you are accomplishing by making that point.
Well, it's just that you can't say that focus is equivalent to mental effort, because mental effort can be done, as I said earlier, if it's properly guided. Poorly, it can be done even morally, but poorly if you don't guide your mind properly.
Yeah.
And that's partly knowledge. And then it can be done evilly. It can be done as evasion.
Wouldn't you agree that volition is equivalent to effort? Because evasion is volitional.
Yes. Yes, volition is equivalent, but focus is not, I would say. Equivalent.
Right. Focus means
involves a particular kind of well-directed mental effort.
Well, so who would you see as your opponent when you say that? Who are you disagreeing with when you say that?
Well,
or what line of reasoning?
Well, I could read it even. The throwing of the switch consists of the exertion of one's mental capacity. This exertion is work and experienced as such. It is the effort. Effort means the expenditure of energy to achieve. Effort means the expenditure of energy to achieve a purpose, but that purpose can be evasion.
Yeah.
So I would want to make it clear, regardless of who I agree or disagree with. I want to be clear that mental effort and free will are not equivalent to focus. The exertion of mental effort is not. That is to say, it's not a switch. I'm going back to that point.
It's a necessary condition.
Necessary condition,
but not sufficient.
Not sufficient because for one thing, you can do it poorly. For another thing, you can do it evilly, and for another thing, there can be things that interfere with your focus, as we just saw. You're well. Anyway,
the interference one is a difficult one to take up.
Yeah.
Can I make a meta comment?
Meta comment.
And
sure.
I think I can. And you're just going to have to take this, Lee. I think what Lee is saying, and what Lee is not the content of everything he says, some of which I disagree with, but this as a topic is one of the most important things you can ever hear. And Lee is one of maybe 3 people in the universe who give thought to this. And he deserves to be listened to. And the points that he is making, as well as other people like me, need to be really thought about, and they'll pay tremendous dividends. This is the heart of who we are as people. This is your you-ness, yourself, your ego that we're trying to put our fingers on here. This is not some topic like, well, is Shakespeare really naturalism, or is that an anachronistic term to apply to him? That was a good example I pulled out of my subconscious there. So this stuff is critical. I remember the first time I heard Lee at Staten Island in 1988, early Objectivist conference that I was co-creator of with Northrop Buechner. I heard him give a lecture, and I thought, my God, somebody else is thinking about this stuff? And then we found out that we both had independently, years earlier, come to the managerial metaphor. And I had even made a sketch of it in my notes when I was in undergrad. And so this is important stuff, and the disagreements that we have, which are, not negligible, can be put aside. And you listen to this subject matter and get into this subject matter. It's so important.
Well, thanks for that. That was very, very nice. And I do just reminded me, I wanted to say something about the zooming idea that you have introduced today, which I think is valid. In terms of the distinction I made earlier, what I think is the distinction between primary and secondary. That is, the primary choice is to exert mental effort, and the secondary choice is the choice of where to direct that attention. And the secondary choice has causal antecedents where the primary choice doesn't. In that connection, I would say the zooming is a secondary choice. Would you?
Yeah.
Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
But it's an important one. It's an important secondary choice. Yeah. And it has something to do with specificity of intention.
That's interesting.
It connects to skill development. When you're learning a skill, you got to zoom in to the little pieces in detail. The classic example is driving. When you learn how to drive, you got to, especially if in the old days, when you learn stick shift, you have to organize, all kinds of muscle movements. I need to push down here and let up over here and think very specifically. And then as it gets automatized, you're basically zooming out to a broader, more generalized intent. So anyway, I think the zooming thing is true. But I'd categorize it as part of the secondary choices.
It's like directing attention and scope of attention is the secondary choice, of which all others are tertiary, quaternary.
That's probably right. That's probably right. I have to think about that, but that's probably right. So there's primary and secondary does not exhaust the analysis. There's more to analyze than that.
Right.
I have to think about that. I wanted to add one other thing because I have to somehow I get always cast in the role of the defender of the animals. Even though I don't know, nobody knows anything about animals, really, about the minds, the consciousness of animals. There's very, very little known. But I have liked to post on HBL pictures, I've done it a few times, of monkey curiosity, where the monkey looks down into the lens of the camera. It's really very, very poignant picture that shows that some animals at least do have curiosity beyond just, what am I going to eat in the next 5 minutes or the next 2 minutes? There is a curiosity. Now, whether that extends to dogs and cats, well, dogs, anyway, I don't know. But there are what you were talking about that babies have may not entirely be unique to babies, but it doesn't matter. It's still true that it's true.
Yeah.
And
the thing about monkeys that blew me away is that if you paint, you know this work, if you paint orange on the top of the head of the monkey where he can't see it, and then show him a mirror after he's learned what a mirror is or had some experience with a mirror, he responds with shock in a way that indicates he knows it's his head that has that blows my mind, because that involves an awareness of self that I didn't think any animal had. But sure, cats and dogs don't have it.
Yeah, I think, well, they have something. Even they have some. I think myself that all consciousness is I being aware of something. There's an I in any consciousness that I'm aware of. Of course, I'm not really directly aware of animal consciousness, so what do we know what it's like to be an elephant? We don't.
I don't think that. I think that it's just it. Like here now, food, as she says in ITO, here now, food, here now, master. It's not, hey, the master's come to me. But in the Gibson sense, there's an I.
Yes, right.
That's right. There's a position in the world.
Co-perceiving.
The world is to co-perceive the. Go ahead, Steve. Steve knows this. To perceive the world is to co-perceive the self. Those go together. Those are correlative. Yeah.
So it's too simple to call focus a state of clarity or a commitment. It is all of these things, but it's focus, as it says in How We Know. Focus is an abstraction covering a wide range of concrete management.
Yeah, that's good. That's Harry, right?
Yes.
That's quite good, because what he's not doing there is he's not committing the fallacy of reification, of turning an abstract idea into a concrete. And it's very easy to do that in this kind of area.
Yeah. Yeah, so and I was thinking here of another way of illustrating this. Suppose we say this would be a little bit too narrow, but suppose we say you have a primary choice of being logical or illogical. Everybody could see, well, yeah, that's behind a lot of my specific choices. And I have to commit. I can't say, well, I'm going to be logical unless it's really convenient to be illogical. To be logical is a switch. You could say all those things, but no one would say, why didn't nature exercise natural selection to make us be logical? It'd be very clear that being logical means using induction, using deduction, detecting fallacies, looking at a wide range of it. You wouldn't be tempted to empty that of content the way that people can be emptying focus of content.
We have a couple of super chats. Should we get them out of the way?
Yeah, let's do that.
Super chat from Zed or Z400 Racer 37 for $2. And it's a question. I'm not sure. I'll just read it as it is. Volition versus choice, ? i.e., choosing to move my arm, referring to Libet, of course. That's all I got. And then the other,
Harry, you want to talk, or I could say something?
Let me finish.
I think you and I disagree slightly on that.
Probably a little bit. Yeah, go ahead, Steve. You're
volition is volition and choice. First, to take the first point, volition is another name for choice, and the choice is not always a conscious selection. The sub choices are a selection among alternatives. The basic choice is to use your mind or not, and that is not made consciously because it's a choice to be conscious. Where I think Lee and I disagree is the second part about action. Lee subscribes to the ideomotor theory of action, at least she used to, and I don't.
More or less, yeah.
I think there is a choice.
You think there's a separable choice? I'm not sure. Let me take something else. He mentioned Libet, which we've talked about before here, but just briefly, the Libet experiments have as their example of free will. You have your fingers are attached to electrodes, and you're told move your finger when you feel like it, and notice when you feel like it. And then they notice that they tell you, you tell them when you feel like it. And they also have electrical recording of when the finger actually moves. But the problem is, leaving aside all the methodological problems, of which there are many in this experiment, the problem is the choice to move your finger when you feel like it. Even under my concept of ideomotor action, that's not free will, that's free whim. That's just when you're doing something when you feel like it. The real choice of free will in the Libet experiment is when you're told about the experiment and you choose to think about it and you choose to accept the task and the tasks involved. In other words, the free will action is long before whenever your finger is moving. That is not a free will action. So that's actually the most basic fallacy, in my opinion, of the Libet experiment and of many of the experiments that have followed after it.
I think it's pronounced Libet because there's two B's and he's not French. And I've heard it, I've heard him speak.
It's one B. It's probably French, so probably originally it was Libet, but I don't know. But anyway, it's usually Libet. They usually call it Libet or Libet, Libet or Libet. Anyway, it's only one T though, and only one B.
Okay, we have another.
I guess. I
guess we could look on the web for that and not go to old-fashioned books. But I have his book. I've heard him talk, and I don't care how you pronounce his name. I want to say two things. Right. I want to say two things. One is he seemed to be a pretty good guy, and he's not a determinist. He just has a slightly wrong theory, free will, but he himself did not think his experiments proved determinism at all.
No.
Anyway, the more important
thing he believed in free won't.
Free won't. That was the subject.
He believed that you could inhibit an action.
Which is something you can do, but it's not basic. I mean, it's only a small part of the story. Anyway, this is the fact that this experiment was done shows the vast difference between Ayn Rand's understanding of free will and the traditional theory. I subscribe 100% to what Lee said about Libet, about the experiment and how it's taken. But if you could not go farther and stay in the realm of human action, then move your finger when you feel like it. So when I teach, and in the book, when I discuss free will, I say the old-fashioned idea of free will is that it pertains to your choice of action. Do I move this way or do I move that way? Slightly better is the choice of values and beliefs. Am I a Republican or am I Democrat? I choose. But more basic than any of them is how do I use my mind? Right? It goes way, but that's what shapes your values and beliefs and your actions and so forth. So He's at the other, I don't mean him as a person, but that experiment is as far as you could ever get from I'm going to perceive reality and find out why this thing is puzzling or whatever. You know, I'm going to be logical and rational here and managing my mind, moving my little finger for no reason, trying to make it kind of be random. I mean, it's bananas. No, that's not my point. My point is really how much deeper Ayn Rand is than any of these clowns. I'll leave it with that.
That's good enough. Steve, you said we had another something else there, which
Apollo
quickly,
Zeus. Right? Yeah, Apollo Zeus has cutting edge with an exclamation point. So we rock, or you guys rock. I guess that's great. My interpretation. Okay, and then we have Vandy for 1999. Wow, thank you, Vandy. What is the cash value of lectures on free will? Since as a primary choice, the choice to focus can't be motivated or informed by anything. ? Continue. What does a detailed...
I have to take this one because...
and I got a comment too, but go ahead.
Okay, because I have thought about this and lectured on this.
Yeah.
There can be no specific motive for focus, but there can be a metaphysical motive, a motive general as anything. I want to exist. I want to accept reality. I want to live in reality. I want to be. There's nothing more general. But if you say, well, I want to make a lot of money, and I'm going to focus when that comes up, that is a censored mind. Okay. So the point that there can't be any motive for focus is true, except there can be a metaphysical motive for focus. Now, what can education do? That's the real question. What good is it to be taught, be rational, be in focus, since it's a choice you just make? It raises the stakes. It makes it easier. The more aware you are, the more your brain or subconscious is sending you alerts, and the more prepared you are to realize those alerts are alerts and are important. So it means after you've studied objectivism, if you're not going to be rational, you've got to evade a lot more than you had to before you studied objectivism, putting it in the negative.
Okay, now this goes back to what I was saying earlier, that there's, Harry agreed, that there's no focus switch. There's no thing you can flick. If you take focus as a commitment, okay, that's a switch. But if you take focus as achieving a state of clarity, full awareness, that is to a significant degree a skill. It requires good introspection. Is the most important thing, in my opinion, that it requires, and that's a skill that you develop over time. So it's not. I've lost a little track of the question, because how did I get on this track?
What good does it do to be told?
Why is it important to be told about focus? Is that it is not just something that you can just say, hocus focus, I'm in focus. Something like, you can't do it that way. If you want to achieve a condition, you need to monitor your thought processes. When you identify something that's going wrong, you need to introspect on it to identify what it is. And then you need to direct your attention appropriately to activate the knowledge necessary to deal with the problems. It's a very important collection of mental skills. And if you just think in terms of, all I have to do is just choose to do it, you will not realize that, and you won't be able to achieve full awareness.
Well, and Ayn Rand says she sees the unfocused mind as full of chance stimuli and random associations. And if you don't learn to read your mind, you're left at, you don't know the contents of your mind. Yeah, just a comment.
Yeah, and you are at the as you were about to say, I think, Steve, at the mercy of whatever antecedent causes happen to grab hold of you. That's the problem. The problem with determinism is that deterministic entities are in that position. They're under the control of whatever happens to grab over, for whatever cause or reason happens to grab hold of you. And free will enables you to override all those causes, and enables you to make your decisions to decide what's true on the basis of the evidence available, rather than just whatever causes happen to impinge on you.
Are as how we know puts it, being the driver of your mind or the passenger?
Well, I got that from Barbara Brandon, unfortunately.
Okay.
Yeah, and again,
she
remember,
got it from
remember
Ayn
the driver can drive the car or the taxi cab right into a telephone pole. So just being the driver is not enough. You have to drive. You have to drive skillfully, and you have to have the right values.
Yeah, you have to have the right purpose. But
yeah.
Yeah. We didn't really get into that. That's my wife's big contribution, is the role of purpose, and she's got some new ideas in that, in free will, in focus.
Okay, maybe we have to bring her on.
Honey?
Another time, that is to say.
She wants me for dinner, to have me come out and set the table for dinner now. So
no Clubhouse. You won't at least show up for a little bit of Clubhouse? Oh well, okay.
No, it's dinner time.
All right, can't interfere with.
But I've enjoyed it, and I think it's been a very productive session. Very productive.
Yeah, thanks.
Yes,
it's good. I thought. So, Steve, you're going to close up for us. I'm going to go over to Clubhouse.
Okay, thanks everybody for attending, and we'll see you over at Clubhouse, and we'll see you back here on YouTube in 2 weeks, a fortnight for the English. And we thank Harry Binswanger. See you guys over there.
Right.
Bye.